Hello and welcome to Weather Snap. I'm Clare Nasir, and joining me today is fellow meteorologist and broadcaster Aidan McGivern. Now, Aidan, what's coming up on the show this week?
We'll have an update to the extremely high sea surface temperatures happening right across the North Atlantic, an update on the heat affecting Mexico and parts of the USA this week, and closer to home, the heat is building across the UK. Heading into the weekend, what will that mean for the Glastonbury Festival?
Interesting. First of all, let's turn our attention to the tropical North Atlantic. It's hurricane season. It begins on the 1st of June. We're 3 weeks into it. And it's been a fairly slow start, hasn't it, Aidan? I mean, to be honest, not a lot going on. I think we had Arlene a week or so ago, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. But something interesting is now developing, and it's remarkable in terms of how far east and south these early tropical storms are. I caught up with tropical prediction scientist Julian Hemming earlier to find out what the latest is.
The sea temperatures right across parts of the North Atlantic, even from up in the latitudes of the UK right down to the tropics, are generally much higher than you'd expect this time of year. And I'll focus particularly on the tropics because what we're seeing there is sea temperatures certainly 1 to 2 degrees widely above average, and in certain places 2, 3, 4 degrees above average as well.
What's the cause of the unusually high sea surface temperatures?
There's sort of a chain of factors which are contributing, particularly to the high sea temperatures in the tropical Atlantic. What we have seen in the last couple of months is that the subtropical high, it's a kind of semi-permanent area of high pressure which sits in the subtropics in the Atlantic, has been weaker than usual. And that has several effects. What it means is that the winds which rotate around it across the western part of Africa and out into the tropical Atlantic are weaker. Those are the trade winds which we normally get. Now, weaker trade winds have a number of effects. First of all, it's lifting less dust off the Sahara and out into the Atlantic than we might normally have. And when we do get the dust, it tends to act as a bit of a barrier between the sun and the ocean. So without that dust, it means the ocean can warm up a little bit quicker. And also with the weaker trade winds, it means we get less stirring of the top layer of the ocean. So there's less cool waters coming up from beneath the surface.
And that in turn is now leading to this unusual activity in the Atlantic with tropical storms and depressions. Can you explain what's so unusual about the activity?
Well, yes, once we get to June, we do get what we call these African easterly waves, which emerge off the coast of Africa and travel across the Atlantic. And these are just disturbances in the lower part of the atmosphere, which can lead to the development of tropical storms. But typically in June, the sea temperatures, particularly over the eastern part of the Atlantic, are not warm enough to sustain the tropical storms. And so these easterly waves can move right across to the other side of the Atlantic into the Caribbean without development. And in June, we might expect some tropical storms, but they'll mostly be focused in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Caribbean Sea. But with this heightened sea temperature we have in the eastern part of the Atlantic, it's resulted in the development of Tropical Storm Brett, as we've seen recently, and another potential tropical storm developing just behind that.
And what do you think will happen during the next few weeks and months as a consequence of these warm seas? Do you think normal service will resume, or will these warm seas continue to have an impact for the rest of the hurricane season?
Well, the current seasonal predictions are suggesting that we will have this unusual warmth in the tropical Atlantic, which will persist through the season. Now, if that happens, then there is a higher likelihood of getting more storms and getting quite intense storms, particularly as we get up to the peak of the season when the sea temperatures do get to a much higher level anyway. The key factor we need to consider here is what's going to happen with regard to El Nino, because we are also seeing a development of an El Nino, which comes about as a result of a warming of the equatorial Eastern Pacific Ocean. And an El Nino's usual effect on the Atlantic hurricane activity is to increase the amount of wind shear, particularly over the western side of the Atlantic basin, and that can often act to suppress hurricane activity in the Atlantic during the season. Now, it remains to be seen whether the El Nino, which is developing, will produce the kind of levels of wind shear which we have seen in previous events, or whether in fact the wind shear is far less, and if it is far less, That combined with the high Atlantic sea temperatures could mean that we could get quite an active season. But at the moment, it's very finely balanced and it could go one way or the other.
Thank you, Julian Hemming.
Now, last week, Alex and I were reporting on the unusually warm coastal waters of the UK. Sea surface temperatures are above average. Tell us what the top lines are. How warm has it got?
Well, some of the biggest anomalies on the planet are currently around the waters of the UK and Ireland. In some places, more than 5 degrees above average for June. In fact, in some places, we're seeing the kinds of temperatures we'd normally expect in September. Now, September's typically the time of year when we get the highest sea surface temperatures in the waters around the UK. So already we're seeing that, and that's 3 months early.
So last week we were discussing the Saharan dust and the effect it has on reflecting sunlight. And obviously that reduces the amount of light that penetrates into the water and warms up the water. Is that probably the deciding factor here that has allowed this heat to really grow?
Yeah, that's one of the most important things when you're looking at the mid to north part of the Atlantic. But also around the UK, of course, we've had a lot of sunshine during recent weeks. And what you can see is this really rapid increase in sea surface temperatures during the first 2 weeks of June. And it's during that period that we had a change of wind direction, bringing much warmer air our way and more humidity. But we also had generally cloud-free skies, so a lot of sunshine, light winds as well, so not enough wind to stir up the seas and cool them down. And all that sunshine just heated up the seas day by day. And we saw an increase of 3, 4, 5 degrees in some parts of the ocean and sea water around the UK and Ireland in just a week or so.
Around the UK, I know that NOAA have declared a marine heat wave across the waters of the UK at level 4. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a pretty high level. And what that means is there could be impacts on marine ecosystems, oxygen and nutrients in the seawater as well, and impacts, and this is what I know a bit more about as opposed to the marine stuff, is the impacts on the weather of the UK and Ireland. And, when you have such high sea surface temperatures at this time of year, it's inevitably going to have impacts on the UK's weather. There are lots of other factors involved with the UK's weather in terms of, where the wind's coming from and the amount of sunshine we get. But these kinds of sea surface temperatures are likely to keep us warmer than average for the next couple of weeks. And they're likely to, and well, another thing that you often see at this time of year is that the showers that develop as temperatures rise through the day are focused inland rather than the seas, because the land tends to be warmer than the seas at this time of year. But what we're already seeing is quite a few showers developing over the seas as well at the moment because of the warmth that we're seeing from the seas. Of course, when you've got such warm seas, you get more fuel, you get more energy, you get more evaporation. And so any rain that does fall, there's a risk that you get more water out of the system at the same time.
And we're already into heat wave criteria. We will be again this weekend. June is running as perhaps the hottest June on record, depending on the next 8 days. So it doesn't bode well for the rest of the summer. If you remember last year, we got some very high temperatures towards the end of June. And then obviously we hit that 40 degrees in July. And it was a very unpleasant and unsafe heat. And we really don't want to be going into that territory again. But with these sea surface temperatures, with the warmth just surrounding us, it's a watch this space, really, isn't it? What are the trends in terms of where we're going with sea surface temperatures for the next few weeks? Are there any forecasts out there?
Well, seas take much longer to cool down and warm up than the atmosphere or the land. So they're not going to go back to normal anytime soon. It looks likely that they're going to stay elevated. However, with the weather over the UK turning a bit more changeable at the end of next week, a bit more breezy and less warm or less hot at the end of next week, then those sea surface temperatures probably won't rise quite as quickly as they have been.
Okay, now before we talk about the UK weather, where the heat will intensify yet again this weekend, heat wave conditions remain over northern Mexico and Texas in the US. Now, this has been going on for quite some time. In fact, last week, the people of Mexico were urged to take safety precautions as the heat wave took hold. During that time, the temperatures were peaking over 30 degrees. Meanwhile, on Monday, the Texas power grid operator asked residents to voluntarily cut back on their electricity as they anticipated record demand. And it noted that, in fact, as a state, they'd hit an unofficial June record for energy demand. So there's been excessive heat warnings issued across much of Texas, Louisiana. Yet, Aidan, the heat has intensified further.
Yeah, record-breaking temperatures are expected over the next few days. Some locations perhaps exceeding 46 or 47 Celsius, around 10 degrees hotter than average for June, even in this hot part of the world. And this heat dome, that's what they're calling it. This is a phenomenon where you get this intense block of hot air in place and stuck in place for a long time. It's just going to persist. I was having a look at the jet stream profile that we're seeing over North America at the moment, and it's really amplified. It's a very wriggly line, and what it's doing is it's dipping south over California, for example, and we're seeing quite cool weather there, but then rising well to the north over central parts of the USA. So that's allowing that heat dome to persist. And then it's dipping south again to bring some cooler air into the Great Lakes region. And what NOAA are forecasting over the next few weeks is for that general pattern to persist.
In fact, if you look at the National Weather Service website, the US website, they've got some brilliant charts on there. But what is really alarming is if you look at the temperature probability for the next 6 to 10 days, the temperatures stay very high across this part of the world. And in fact, below average across the western states. However, if you look at 8 to 14 days ahead, things shift a little bit. So it warms up across the western states. It remains well above average across Texas generally and Louisiana. And there's a squeeze on that coolness, which pushes up towards the far north, towards the border of Canada, and remaining below average across the northeastern states, where there's in fact been a big area of low pressure for the last few weeks, which brought all that dust and from the wildfires across Quebec. Well, they remain under sort of cooler conditions here. So worrying information, lots of intense heat across this part of the world. And it doesn't bode well, obviously, for the people living there, for the wildlife, and obviously the coastal waters as well.
Exactly. And what we're going to see as we go through the next few days as well is that heat across Mexico and the US, that's been pushing the jet stream north, but it also comes up against colder air coming south across northern Canada and the Greenland area. And what that will do is it will actually pep up the jet stream a little bit, and that then has downstream consequences on the UK's weather heading into the weekend.
Right, so there's a lot to play for. You did your 10-day trend on Wednesday. So this is another longer format one that we issue every week. Can you give us some indications what's happening into the weekend and beyond? You've already alluded to the fact things could get a bit more unsettled.
In some places, yes. So what we're seeing is a phenomenon known as the return of the westerlies heading into next week. Now, there was a climatologist called Hubert Lamb who many decades ago analysed 100 years worth of weather patterns to see if any of them repeated themselves through the year. And he found that in the second half of June, you often get a return of the westerly winds following a weakening of this phenomenon during May and early June. And we've certainly seen a lack of westerlies during recent weeks. And what you often see at this time of year is the jet stream starts to get a bit more active again. And we're certainly going to see that over the next few days because of those temperature contrasts developing over North America. And that allows some areas of low pressure to start to develop over the North Atlantic and move our way. However, initially, for the latter half of this week and into the weekend, actually that more changeable weather will be focused across Scotland and Northern Ireland. And for much of England and Wales, it's going to turn sunnier. And as the winds change to southwesterlies, we're going to see the showers die away and the sunshine return with increasing heat and humidity. So by the weekend, parts of southeast England will be up to 30 or 31 Celsius. But that return of the westerlies doesn't just affect the north. By next week, it starts to move further south. And so more changeable weather across the whole of the UK, cooler conditions by the end of next week compared with what we're going to see this weekend, but probably temperatures staying above average across the UK.
So we could see one of the hottest Junes on record. It's going in that direction, definitely, isn't it? So yeah, we'll keep you posted on that as we head into July. And to be honest, the rain is coming to Scotland and Northern Ireland, and Scotland really, really needs it. We talked about water scarcity just a couple of weeks ago, and it was worrying how low the levels were. So a good dump of sort of, as I say to my husband, a persistent, moderate rain is a good thing. You know, he has no idea what I mean, but You get it, Aidan, don't you? You see where I'm
Yeah,
coming from.
it's useful rain.
It's useful rain. In fact, when people get really annoyed, say it's the wrong kind of rain. Well, there is the wrong kind of rain, and we'll be seeing it, in the next few days in terms of showers. But when you get that nice sort of swathe of cloud, the skies turn dull, it turns cool, the wind picks up, and then you get 6 hours of useful rain. It's good for the water table.
It's good for the soul. Yeah.
Yes, but we don't really want a lot of rain for Glastonbury. Back in the 90s, I did go to Glastonbury a few times. I developed trench foot one season because it was so wet. I think it was 1997 or something. But the problem is also when it's hot at Glastonbury, there's not a lot of places to hide. Unless you're in a marquee where it overheats, there's not many trees or anything, so there's no sort of shade.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be a mud bath this year. A few showers as people arrive, but generally it's turning sunnier, and that increase in heat and humidity will also be noticed at Glastonbury. Temperatures will rise day by day with long spells of sunshine. And of course, we've just seen the summer solstice, so that sun is about as strong as it gets. So that's certainly something to be aware of. And with that sunshine comes the increased temperatures day by day. So we're looking at mid-20s by the weekend, 26, 27 Celsius possible by Saturday, which is going to feel hot, I think, at a festival. It's going to be humid as well. And overnight temperatures not dipping below 15 or 16 Celsius. So quite uncomfortable in a tent with a hangover. But we don't need to worry about flooded fields or anything. We've seen the heavy showers at first this week. They're easing away, so it is turning drier. Plenty of sunshine, plenty of fine weather to come.
Have you ever been to Glastonbury?
I haven't, no. And you know what, it coincides this year with Pixie Day in Ottery St Mary, so I can't make it.
Do you know, I'd love to go this year, although I haven't been for years, because we do have 2 climate scientists heading down to the Greenfields, don't we, Aidan? We have our own Professor Richard Betts. He's in the Greenfields, being interviewed today by Tamsin Edwards. And on Sunday, he's doing a talk, and that's at 12:45 at the Greenfields. So, yeah, he's heading down there, but also a climate scientist who is based at the Met Office called Rosie Eade, who's a musician as well as a very clever person. And she's going to be performing. She sings songs around climate change and nature. So she's there all weekend. Check her out. She's on the laboratory stage each afternoon or evening, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So good luck to Rosie, and her music can be found on Spotify. So yeah, we've got a presence there from the Met Office, and probably some of our staff members will be heading there as well. It's not too far away from Exeter, really, is it?
Yeah, I've got no excuse in future years.
No excuse at all.
Even if it means missing Pixie Day.
What is Pixie Day then?
This is a local legend in Ottery St Mary, which is the town I live in Devon. Basically, it commemorates the legend that loads of pixies got chased out of the town many years ago. And every year they recreate that by chasing lots of little girls down the high street and ringing bells and screaming and all sorts.
Brilliant. Aidan, it's great to have your company today. Thanks for joining me. Enjoy Pixie Day. And for everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye-bye.
Another great weather snap, Claire. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to hit subscribe. Then you'll catch all of our daily weathers on YouTube as well.
And if podcasts are your thing, check out our Met Office podcast channel. Lots of information, lots of stories there. And we'll see you again next week.